When you think of a royal rebel, you probably think of the modern princes, the ones who broke with tradition and sent the monarchy reeling. But the boldest rebel in the royal family's history isn't a modern prince at all. She was a Tudor noblewoman who defied kings, arranged forbidden marriages, and got herself thrown in the Tower of London 3 separate times for her dynastic scheming. This is the story of Lady Margaret Douglas, the king's niece who played the Game of Thrones for real from the shadows, and whose bloodline ultimately won. You think you know royal scandals? Think again. To understand Margaret Douglas, you have to start with her blood. It was both her greatest weapon and her most dangerous weakness. Born on October 8, 1515, she was the daughter of Margaret Tudor, the Queen Dowager of Scotland, and, more importantly, the older sister of England's imposing King Henry VIII. Her father was the powerful and chaotic Scottish nobleman, Archibald Douglas. This combination of parents put Margaret right in the middle of succession politics from the day she was born. Her very existence was a political problem. As the granddaughter of King Henry VII, she was a direct link to the Tudor dynasty. In an age where royal bloodlines were fragile and heirs were everything, Margaret's proximity to the English throne made her a huge deal. This was especially true while her uncle, Henry VIII, was tearing his kingdom apart trying to get a male heir, leaving a trail of illegitimate daughters behind him. For a while, Margaret was one of the few women around with a solid, legitimate claim to the English crown, making her both a threat and a pawn to the powerful men running the show. Her childhood was just as chaotic as her parents' marriage. She was born in a castle in England because her mother had to flee warring factions in Scotland. Her early years were spent being passed back and forth between her parents during their messy, violent relationship. At one point, her mother even had cannons fired at her father. Finally, around 1530, young Margaret was sent to the English court, basically as a goodwill gesture to her fearsome uncle, King Henry VIII. At court, she was treated like a princess and quickly became a favorite of the king, who gave her the nickname Megget. She grew up with her cousin, the future Queen Mary I, and the two became lifelong friends. She even served as a lady-in-waiting to several of Henry's wives, including the doomed and Boleyn. But being a Tudor woman with royal blood meant walking on a knife's edge. The king's affection could turn to wrath in a heartbeat. And for a woman like Margaret, full of fire and ambition, a clash with the most powerful man in England wasn't a question of if, but when. She was about to find out that in the Tudor court, love was the most dangerous game of all. In 1536, the English court was in shock. Queen and Boleyn had just been executed on phony charges, a brutal reminder of King Henry VIII's absolute power. In that climate of fear, any wrong move could get you killed, especially if you had royal blood. And it was at this exact moment that Lady Margaret Douglas chose to commit her first major act of rebellion. She fell in love. The man was Lord Thomas Howard, a younger brother of the powerful Duke of Norfolk. They secretly got engaged, even exchanging love poems that we still have today, a bittersweet record of a romance that was destined for failure. For someone in Margaret's position, marrying without the king's permission was totally out of the question. It was a political challenge, hinting at another power base and a threat to the official line of succession. When Henry VIII found out about the secret engagement, he was absolutely furious. He was convinced Howard was only marrying his niece to get a shot at the throne. This wasn't just a family disagreement. This was potential treason. Both Margaret and Thomas were arrested and thrown into the Tower of London. To make an example of them, Henry had Parliament pass a new law, an Act of Attainder. This law made their engagement a crime punishable by death, and for the first time, it officially banned any royal from marrying without the monarch's permission. This law was literally created because of Margaret. The Tower was a terrifying place. While they were imprisoned, both Margaret and Thomas got seriously ill. Thomas Howard, only 26 years old, never made it out alive. He died in 1537, a chilling warning to anyone else who might think of defying the king. Margaret, however, was spared. After she became desperately ill, her uncle the king softened, maybe out of some leftover affection, and had her moved to a nearby abbey to recover. She was eventually pardoned, but the experience changed her forever. She had risked her life for love and paid a horrific price. But Margaret was a survivor through and through. And believe it or not, she didn't learn her lesson. In 1540, she got in trouble with the king again for another secret affair, this time with Sir Charles Howard, the nephew of her first love. This time, maybe because the king was distracted by his fifth wife's own massive scandals, Margaret got off with just a reprimand. She had stared death in the face twice and walked away. These early rebellions, sparked by love, made her tougher. She was learning that to win in the brutal world of Tudor politics, she needed more than just passion. She needed calculation, cunning, and an ambition that could outlast the stone walls of the Tower. After 2 scandals and a near-death experience in the Tower, you'd think Margaret Douglas would have learned to play by the rules. Well, she learned to play the game better. Her next romantic move wasn't about passion. It was cold, hard strategy. In 1544, at 29 years old, she married Matthew Stewart, the 4th Earl of Lennox. Unlike her past relationships, this one had the full blessing of her uncle, King Henry VIII. But this wasn't just a simple family wedding. Henry saw the marriage as a political tool to push English influence into Scotland. Matthew Stewart was a Scottish exile with his own weak claim to the Scottish throne. By marrying him to Margaret, who had a strong claim to the English one, a new power couple was born. And even though it was an arranged match, by all accounts, Margaret and Matthew grew to have a real affection for each other and became a strong team. They set up their home at Temple Newsam in Yorkshire, which quickly became a hotspot for Catholic plotting in the north of England. As the country became more Protestant, especially under Henry's son, Edward VI, this marriage gave Margaret the heirs her ambition desperately needed. They had 2 sons who survived infancy. Henry Stuart, born in 1545, who we know as Lord Darnley, and a younger son, Charles Stuart. From the moment they were born, these boys weren't just kids, they were pieces on a chessboard, and Margaret was the one moving them. Her ambition was crystal clear. She was going to get the thrones of both England and Scotland for her family. Her eyes landed on another young woman with royal blood and a powerful claim, her own niece, the young Mary, Queen of Scots. Margaret started dreaming up a match that would shake Great Britain to its core, a marriage between her son, Lord Darnley, and the Queen of Scotland. A union like that would merge 2 of the strongest claims to Queen Elizabeth's throne, creating a Catholic powerhouse that the Protestant Queen in London couldn't possibly ignore. While her first rebellions were fueled by youthful passion, her new strategy was all about patience and plotting. She wasn't just defying monarchs for love anymore. She was now scheming to put her own family above the monarch. The young girl who was sent to the Tower for writing love poems had transformed into a master political player. She was building alliances, boosting her son's claims, and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The next time she defied a monarch, it wouldn't be for her own heart. It would be for a crown. Fast forward to the 1560s, and the whole political world has changed. Henry VIII is long gone, and so are his kids, Edward VI and Mary I. The throne of England now belongs to the impressive Queen Elizabeth I, the Protestant daughter of Anne Boleyn. But Elizabeth was unmarried and had no children, a fact that obsessed her entire reign. Every court in Europe was whispering, who would be next? And from her house in Yorkshire, Margaret Douglas was sure she had the answer, her son. Her grand plan, the result of years of scheming, was to unite the 2 biggest claims to Elizabeth's throne. Her son, Lord Darnley, had a strong claim from his grandmother, Margaret Tudor. And up in Scotland was the young, Catholic Mary, Queen of Scots, who had an equally powerful claim as the granddaughter of that same Margaret Tudor. Marrying these first cousins would combine their claims and create a Catholic heir so powerful he'd be undeniable. It was a brilliant, daring plan. It was also incredibly dangerous. Queen Elizabeth I knew exactly what a threat Mary, Queen of Scots, was. She was also deeply suspicious of Margaret Douglas, her Catholic cousin who had already shown she was a rebel. Elizabeth flat out forbade any such marriage. But Margaret wasn't about to be stopped by a queen's command. She started pulling strings from the shadows. In 1565, Lord Darnley went to Scotland, with Elizabeth's grudging permission but with the clear goal of making the match happen. The meeting between Mary, Queen of Scots, and Lord Darnley was like lightning. At 19, Darnley was tall, handsome, and charming. Mary, a widow who needed an heir, was instantly captivated. What started as Margaret's political plot quickly turned into a real, passionate romance. Ignoring Queen Elizabeth's rage and the warnings from her own advisors, Mary, Queen of Scots, married Henry Stuart, Lord Darnley, on July 29, 1565. When news of the rogue marriage hit London, Elizabeth I was livid. This wasn't just disrespectful. It was a direct challenge to her authority and a huge threat to her throne. She knew right away that Margaret was behind it all. Her reaction was swift and harsh. Margaret Douglas, for the second time in her life, was arrested and locked up in the Tower of London. But this time, she wasn't some lovesick girl. She was a master schemer whose plot had actually worked. She had defied her queen and put her son on the Scottish throne as king consort. Her family was now one step closer to the ultimate prize, the crown of England. But as she sat in her cold cell, Margaret had no idea what a terrible, bloody price this victory would cost. Locked away in the Tower of London, Margaret Douglas could only watch from a distance as her grand design began to self-destruct in the most horrifying way. The dream marriage shed engineered between her son, Darnley, and Mary, Queen of Scots, had turned into a total nightmare. Darnley, once so charming, turned out to be arrogant, entitled, and viciously ambitious. He became a jealous drunk who resented Mary's power. He even took part in the brutal murder of her private secretary, David Rizzio, a murder that happened right in front of the pregnant queen. Then, on February 19, 1567, devastating news reached Margaret in her cell. Queen Elizabeth sent two ladies-in-waiting to tell her that her son, Lord Darnley, was dead. He had been brutally murdered in Edinburgh. After the house he was in was blown up by a huge explosion, his body was found strangled in a nearby orchard. The Spanish ambassador wrote that Margaret's grief was overwhelming. She physically collapsed from the shock. Her reaction was so intense that a concerned Queen Elizabeth sent her own doctors to treat her in the Tower. In that moment, she wasn't a political player. She was just a mother who had lost her son. Her dreams for her family had been shattered. But out of that deep grief, a new, cold fury was born. Everyone immediately suspected that Mary, Queen of Scots, and her close advisor, the Earl of Bothwell, were behind Darnley's murder. Mary then sealed her fate by marrying Bothwell just a few months later. Margaret, who once saw Mary as the key to her family's rise, now saw her as her son's murderer. When she was released from the Tower later that year, she channeled all her energy into one thing: vengeance. She became one of Mary's loudest and most effective critics. She wrote letters demanding justice and relentlessly built a case against the Scottish Queen, playing a huge role in turning both English and Scottish opinion against her. Her husband, Matthew Stuart, even served for a time as the regent of Scotland for their infant grandson, King James VI, before he too was assassinated in 1571. Margaret had now lost a lover to the Tower, her oldest son to a conspiracy, and her husband to the violent chaos of Scottish politics. She had been imprisoned multiple times and seen her greatest plans end in blood and tragedy. Most people would have been broken, but Margaret was a Tudor and a Douglas, and her ambition was far from dead. She had one son left, Charles, and a grandson who was now the King of Scotland. The game wasn't over, and she had one last rebellion left in her. After enduring unimaginable loss and spending years in prison, you'd think Margaret Douglas would finally retire quietly. But that just wasn't her style. Her ambition was a fire that no amount of tragedy could put out. With her eldest son Darnley murdered and her husband assassinated, her family's hopes now rested on her younger son.